Hey y'all, my name is Megan Green. I am an astrologer and tarot reader based out of Gainesville, Florida. I have not made a video in quite some time. I have no excuse for that. But what I did know is that I needed to resurrect this channel with at least one more video when I saw what was going on with Kendrick Lamar and Drake. I am a huge hip hop fan, huge pop culture fan, and I really love to study the ways that Mercury shows up in hip hop. The best rappers are Mercury ruled, producers. It is a multi-dimensional experience that requires multiple talents. Hip hop is based off of art, music, dance. There's just so many elements at play that make it amazing and mercurial that I just have to kind of throw my 2 cents in when it comes to stuff like this. So I intend to pull Kendrick's chart, Drake's chart, do a little breakdown, then look at their Synastry, which is both of their charts together, and then if we have some time, pull some cards to see if we can get down to the bottom of what is going on with these boys. So let's do it. Okay, so I have a ton of notes and I'm gonna try to just kind of stick to the point. So know that there's no way I can break down these charts in totality, but I'm gonna do my best and just kind of approach it in the way of like, what are the first things that stood out to me, what comes to mind, how I would kind of look at this if they were clients that I was seeing. So let's start with K-Dot. So if you've never seen a chart before, this middle wheel is going to be Kendrick Lamar's birth chart, and then the outer wheel is going to be the transits on the day that I pulled this chart. So I am filming this on Monday, May 6th at around 12:18 p.m., but I pulled this chart the day before, Sunday, May 5th at around 5:05 p.m. So the difference between me filming right now and when I pulled this chart is that the moon at the time was in Aries, and now as I'm filming, it has moved into Taurus. But the time you're watching it, it's definitely probably gonna be somewhere else. So just kind of keep that in mind. But I did see that the moon being where it was kind of appropriate for what I was working with today. So there's a lot here. The first thing that stood out to me is that Kendrick has a lot of double-bodied energy. Now, the double-bodied signs are generally considered the mutable signs. That's going to be Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces. And we call them double-bodied and mutable because there's an element of this or that, here or there, ambiguity, adaptability, change. There's just a lot of things that are in flux with those signs. And so there's a dualistic nature that they sort of possess. I also sometimes like to throw Libra into that conversation because even though Libra is a cardinal sign, its symbol is the scale. So there's already this sort of weighing of two things that happens there. And Libra is about consideration. It is about relationships and sort of mirroring or reflecting something. So there's a dualistic nature that it also possesses. And this is important because Kendrick is a Libra rising. He has a Gemini sun and a Pisces moon. So his big three, even though he does not want to be considered in a big three, all exist within this double-bodied nature. So what really came to mind for me was that I bet Kendrick is someone who always has like a devil on one shoulder and angel on the other. Like he's always sort of listening to, multiple perspectives, kind of weighing things and considering different options all of the time. And I think to some degree, he probably sat for a while and really considered like, should I do this? Do I really want to do this? Do I really want to go this hard? Is this really my plan? But then ultimately he made his decision, right? So there is this element of exchange, of comparison or contrasting in some way that is happening within these dualities on a very personal level for him. So from the perspective, which would be that Libra ascendant, from the idea of self, but then also from an emotional space with that moon in Pisces, and then also just like the general archetypal vision for his life, and that general ego essence with that sun in Gemini. Lots of duality. What also stood out to me in terms of transits is that Kendrick has his natal Saturn in the third house of Sagittarius, and that's where he would have had his Saturn return. But also, we have transit Saturn now in Pisces in his sixth house, sitting on his moon in Pisces. And what's even more kind of stunning is that transit Saturn is at 17 degrees Pisces and his natal Saturn is at 17 degrees Sagittarius. So this is an exact Saturn square. So he is sort of challenging the lessons that he either learned or did not learn during his Saturn return. And for him, with a Saturn in the third house, it would have been about his mindset, the way that he communicates, the way that he structures his craft, the way that he shows up within his local communities, with any siblings or with any cousins. It makes me curious if his connection to baby Keem kind of heightened during that Saturn return, because the third house sometimes represents cousins and siblings and things like that. But for him, there was some sort of maturity happening in terms of those third house themes that now will have advanced to the station of a square where we're meeting a challenge, or we're meeting some sort of confrontation with that energy. And so for him, that Saturn is now in the sixth house of work, health, routines, habits, service, but it's also about coworkers or subordinates. And while you nor I would probably consider Drake a coworker, I think in this case, Drake would be considered a coworker in Kendrick's industry, in his workspace of that sixth house, right, of Pisces. Pisces is an incredibly intuitive, musical, imaginative, creative sign that is super empathetic and really feels for the collective in some sense. And Kendrick has that energy in his sixth house of work and service. So that square is challenging that third house communication style, that third house mindset, that third house of being in a community. It's being challenged in a workspace, and it's in an emotional spot for Kendrick. Like, he really feels strongly about what's happening in that sixth house arena. And so the couple of notes that I have for this Saturn square is that it's challenging his maturity. It's intellect versus habits and behavior. It's like, it's not just the things that I talk about, it's the things that I do. It's the way that I live. The sixth house is about service, and then there's such a spiritual piece to Pisces that for me this feels like a spiritual service, or perhaps even like a clash of morals within his work industry, right? Like, this does not align with my spirit. This is something that I'm sort of challenging or trying to work or trying to refine in some way. I think it's also about defining emotional boundaries within the industry. And feeling a responsibility, like being called to do so. And then I also see this as him sort of like speaking up and using his voice. Again, if we think about that third house Saturn being about the way that he communicates, the way that he learns, he's really sort of refined and matured his speech, and now he's using it. And Saturn is also very much about the father, and there's a lot of paternal themes that are happening in the conversation between these two men, how they were raised, how they're raising children, you know, the quality of their paternal experience. And I really see this Saturn square as Kendrick kind of sunning Drake in a way. Like, you know, we hear that kind of thrown around a lot in rap lyrics, like, you know, these other people are my sons. But it really feels like Kendrick feels a responsibility to act in a paternal way towards Drake and potentially other people within the industry. So that was really interesting to me. I also kind of see this transit Saturn here in Pisces trine to his 10th house of Cancer, where his natal Mercury and Mars is, as like his dedication to his work really paying off in a public way. So again, that sixth house being the daily work that you do, the work that you do that maybe nobody sees because it's underneath the surface. Trine to all of this energy in Cancer, where everyone can see everything. It's that hard work paying off. And even just this Moon in Pisces, again, is just reminding me of like feeling for the collective, speaking for the collective, with that trine to Cancer really being an easy flow of exchange, and him being sort of supported and understood on a mass scale. And also, I just think it's him being like well respected within the industry, because people know his work ethic, they know how he feels. That trine to the 10th is just a lot of support. So that is kind of my thoughts on the Saturn, the Moon. We also see that he has a lot going on in the 7th and 8th houses right now. So to talk about the 7th house of Aries, you also have to talk again about that Libra ascendant, right? And so that brings us to the nodes. Kendrick is having these eclipses in his 1st and 7th house. So the 1st house of Libra, the 7th house of Aries. This is also his nodal return. Those of us born between 1986 and 1987 are currently experiencing the nodal return. I was born in August 1987. I am experiencing it big time. So I can definitely relate to some of the themes that I see playing out for both of these people. So for Kendrick, it's going to be about his self and his perspective and the way that he sees the world and kind of shows up in the world. And it's also going to be about the relationships, the affiliations he has, the contracts and agreements that he's made with that 7th house in Aries. And there's a bit of a contradiction here, because normally Aries would be kind of affiliated with the 1st. Normally Libra would be seen more in the 7th. But we have them here reversed, and then we have the nodes also kind of reversed. So there is a bit of this that for Kendrick is about shedding an old version of himself and moving into a new sense of interdependence with others, and really sort of defining himself in a way, or setting himself apart from those that he's been affiliated with before. And it's coming off in a really aggressive way, because Aries is a very assertive, driven, action-oriented sign, and we have planets that are really supporting that experience or that expression right now. So Kendrick is being asked to sort of shed an old skin and to move into this new dimension. And there is an element of conflict that is happening just, by the nature of the signs, and also by the nature of the planets involved. So Mars moved into the sign of Aries, which again for Kendrick is the 7th house place. Recently, and on the day that it went 0 degrees, Kendrick dropped that first track. So since then, it's been sort of like an aggressive push forward, and that is 100% Mars in Aries. Mars is action-oriented, assertive, and driven. It has a purpose, and Aries is a warrior. So there's a lot of action happening here in terms of Kendrick and his relationships and setting himself apart. Aries wants to be an individual. It wants to lead its own way. It's a pioneer. So while the 7th house is talking about being with others, it's very clear it's about sort of identifying oneself within the construct of others. We also had the moon here on the day that I pulled this chart, but then the North Node, Mercury, and Chiron. So the North Node is like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. It's pushing him forward. Mercury is just representing the intellect, the mind, the conversation, what's being said, who it's being said to. And Chiron is representing wounds that need to be healed, and maybe that are sort of being exposed in terms of relationships with another. So I feel like this is a conflict that needed to happen. It's sort of faded to some degree when the nodes are involved. And it's also a part of Kendrick's journey because his nodes are involved. So this is a faded moment of him really sort of setting himself apart, standing out, and really defining who he is. And it's healing to him in some ways, but it's also aggressive, and it's really sort of dominating in other ways. And so this is just a really interesting moment for him of individuating and no longer kind of keeping the peace or doing the politicking. Libra is a peacekeeper. Libra cares about appearances. Libra wants to go along to get along, and that's what's being shed right now. So I think there may have been a part of this previously where Kendrick was kind of just like, I may not agree with this dude, but I'm just going to kind of go with it. And as time has progressed, he's just realized that it's not something that he can be affiliated with. And not only that, it's not something that he can be quiet about. Again, that Mercury Chiron is really like, speak up, use your voice, be a warrior, be a protector for others. We see also that there's this 8th house energy going on here with Taurus. And so while the 7th house is about other people, the 8th house is about sort of other people's belongings. It's also about power, psychology, joint resources, large amounts of money, things like that. Taurus is an earth sign, so wherever Taurus shows up in a chart, there's a sense of stability, steadfastness, and just a lot of structure sometimes I feel with Taurus. And I interpret that in the 8th house as there being like this stable, secure sense of power that Kendrick's operating from. And there's a lot of energy there right now. We've got Venus, we've got the Sun, we've got Uranus and Jupiter. We're going to have the new moon there perfecting tomorrow, which is Tuesday, May 7th. On the East Coast at around 11 p.m., 11:30. So there's going to be, 5 planets in that part of the chart soon for him. And it's really talking about the power of his values, the power of his resources, and, the affiliations and connections that he's made with other people throughout the industry, the power of his associations. So I really feel like it's sort of pushing the force of what's also happening here in the 7th, because we think about the symbolism of Taurus as the bull, right? Like they don't stir often, but when they do, it's forceful and it's really moving forward. And it just seems like Kendrick not only has the strength of himself, but he also has the strength of other external resources. And we kind of see that 7th and 8th house connection in the way that other rappers have sort of backed him, how producers have provided him with, amazing beats to sort of build off of. Jupiter is sort of the blessings. Venus is really sort of the harmonious aspect of those external resources that Kendrick can kind of siphon from. And then we also just see the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, and I see that force kind of being like, I'm going to hit you out of nowhere. Because again, that Uranus is sudden shakeups and surprises, and Jupiter is just expanding whatever it's touching. So I really feel like it's almost like he's molly-whopping Drake out of nowhere with an intensity, right? Like it's an earthquake in a way. So that I found really interesting as well. Some other thoughts is that there's just a lot of support happening to this 10th house space with Kendrick right now. And I think we're going to see some interesting things happen with this Pluto happening in the 5th house. Okay, yeah, that was where I wanted to go next. So the 5th and 11th house axis for Kendrick is lit up because Pluto is now in Aquarius. Pluto is the planet of death, rebirth, and transformation. It's also about power dynamics. Sometimes it can really be affiliated with a lot of 8th house themes. And for Kendrick, it's in the 5th house of creativity, children, fun, play, competition, and we really see that activated with Pluto. Now, Pluto's going to be in Aquarius for the next 20 years. So this is really interesting to see Kendrick have such a major creative burst so early in the game. I'm really curious to see how it plays out in the long run. But Pluto also just recently went retrograde, and it's going to dip its toe back into the 4th house of Capricorn for Kendrick, which is about home and family and his inner emotional rooting. So while I do feel like there is a lot of strength in what Kendrick is creatively producing, I also think there may be a thread of truth to some of the allegations within his home and family, or what might be going on, within his home and family, and maybe even how it's like impacting his kids because it's 4th and 5th house. Not to say that any of those allegations are true, but just that there might be some, reason why that's being brought up now. And so when Pluto dips back into Capricorn, I'd be curious to see how this affects him on a personal level, internally, like what's going on behind the scenes. And then again, that Pluto is going to start moving forward and moving back into Aquarius later in the year. Also with that Pluto in the 5th house, it's sitting opposite Kendrick's 11th house of friendships, networks, collectives, aspirations, hopes and dreams, pursuits. And it's also it's social media, it is like the masses. So Kendrick is having this big creative rebirth. The masses are sort of enjoying it, but also I feel like it is sort of it's artistically reflecting what's happening on a collective level, I think, in the world, but also within the industry that he's in, and also just within the creative field in general, because we think about Leo as being, very creative, very artistic, very theatrical. And so this Pluto in opposition is really challenging that in some way and sort of confronting things within the underworld of that I also think is super interesting. So I think that's all I want to say about Kendrick. Let's move on to Drake. All right, let's get to Drake. So, standout things in Drake's chart for me. Again, same situation. He's going to be that inner wheel. The current transits at the time of me taking this chart are going to be on the outer wheel. You can see that Drake has a differently oriented chart, right? For a lot of Kendrick's chart, there were a lot of things happening on this side of other people. For Drake, there's a lot of things happening on the top of the chart. So when we have such a top-heavy chart, that means what we are doing is very much in the public eye and being seen by everyone. And I think that is fair to say. And if you want to kind of look at where his natal placements fall, so many of them are at the bottom of the chart. So this is someone who really, to some extent, values privacy, needs privacy, wants privacy. So to have so much conflicting energy, I'm sure is kind of uncomfortable and pretty challenging to him right now. So Drake also has his nodes in Libra and Aries. So this again is his nodal return. For him, it's going to be in the 3rd house of, again, communication, intellect, local community, siblings, cousins, anything like that. And then that 9th house of higher education, higher ideals, spirituality, philosophy, broadcasting, foreign, experiences. It's also legal matters. Which is interesting, and I'm kind of curious to see how that might unfold over time. So there's a nodal return happening there for him as well, where he's kind of needing to learn some lessons and maybe shed something old and move into something new. He has in Scorpio in the 4th house. So anytime people have an emphasis of planets in the 4th house, ancestry, their family, their home life is a major part of who they are, their life, and the experiences that they're going to have to go through. He has his Sun, Ceres, Pluto, Venus, the IC, and Mercury in the 4th house of Scorpio. So much of his life is going to revert back to that just by the nature of all of those planets being there. So he's got a major there. Scorpio is all about power, self-possession, possessions just in general. It's also very investigative. It is very psychological. It's very deep. It is very investigative. Like it wants to get to the bottom of things. And there can also be an element of underworld themes with Scorpio. A lot of sex, a lot of, power, a lot of abuses, things like that. All of those can be tied to Scorpio. So it's kind of it's a heavy bottom to have at your chart, right? And we see the Sun there, which is Drake and his ego and his identity, but it's also kind of the father to some extent. And we see Ceres, which is like how one is nurtured. And it's also about like the sacrifices one makes. And Pluto is there amplifying that, just making whatever that narrative is a lot bigger for him in terms of home and family. And then we have Venus there, which is, the planet of love and what we attract and how we attract it, beauty, value, things like that. But it's also just quite frankly feminine energy and women. And it's in the sign of Scorpio, which is not exactly the most supportive sign for Venus. It is considered in its, in a weakened state when it's in the sign of Scorpio. So that is interesting too. And it's also retrograde. So it's not functioning in a direct or a linear way. There's more of a internal or maybe even regressive or, just it's oriented differently there also. So there's a couple of challenges for that placement there in terms of women and values and things like that, and what he attracts into his life. And then he also has Mercury there, which is the way that he communicates, his intellect, and how he comes across. So all of that is buried in his 4th house of Scorpio, and it's being challenged by everything up there that's transiting that top part of his sky. So the couple of notes that I wrote is that with that Sun, Ceres, Pluto, there's an element of like parental and nurturing wounds. Perhaps with it being in the 4th house and in Scorpio, some hidden secrets, some hidden power dynamics down there as well. And it's definitely an ancestral link. Like, I don't think, Drake may not even fully understand the gravity of the situations that have happened before him within his family, but he is sort of being, tapped to address it, to be the one who addresses it in this lifetime. And that Taurus at the top of the chart, again, is just highlighting his secrets, highlighting his values concerning women, and that Uranus and Jupiter is shaking up the way that he's being perceived by the public right now. And it's just a lot of exposure, which for a Scorpio, I don't think is ever a good thing, especially if they can't be sort of in control of the way that that exposure is released. I also noticed that he has a 0-degree sun in Scorpio, and 0 degrees is the first degree in the 30 degrees of any sign. And to me, it just sort of speaks to like not really knowing what he's doing in this energy yet. Like, he's a baby Scorpio, so he's learning how to use his power. He's learning how to use his depth. He's learning all of these things, but it's almost like he's been given too much too soon, like with that 0-degree placement. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that ends up manifesting through the totality of his life. Also, the next thing that I noticed, so to break down the big 3 of Drake, since we did it for Kendrick, Drake is a Scorpio sun, he is a Cancer moon, and he is a Leo rising. So where Kendrick had a lot of this mutable energy, Drake kind of comes with an interesting, fixed, watery energy. So there's a lot less change. There's a lot less flexibility there sometimes. And emotions maybe prevail over, logic or action per se. So I thought that that was interesting also. He also has a 29-degree ascendant in Leo. So where that 0 degrees in Scorpio is like that beginning energy, 29 degrees is like a mastery. It's the final completion. It's the last breath of that sign. It is considered an anaretic degree. Both the 0 and the 29 are considered anaretic. So with this 29-degree ascendant, it sits on the fixed star Regulus. And Regulus is a fixed star that is affiliated with regality, with kings, but it's also about like a sudden downfall, ego, accidents, violence. And this is where Drake's ascendant lies at 29 degrees Leo. So there is this element of his personhood being affiliated with status, with, being considered special or set apart in some way, but it's almost to his detriment if not used wisely or developed or harnessed, for the good. So when I see that 29-degree ascendant and I think about transit Pluto, now in his 7th house of relationships and other people, approaching his natal Mars in the 7th house, which already makes your relationships with other people kind of based on conflict or, action or, just how you operate within groups is a little bit more intensified. Now we've got Pluto blowing that up and kind of it down, sitting opposite his ascendant in his 1st house. So this feels like a collective power move against him. If we think about, Aquarius representing the collective, but then also in the 7th house of other people, with that Mars there and that battle tension energy sitting opposite his ascendant and who he is. It's challenging and destroying the ego. It's the group versus me. At some point that Pluto is going to meet that Mars at 8 degrees, and I just wonder if that's, possibly a moment of either violence or major action, or if there's some sort of like realization that happens there. But those are two planets that are really kind of intense to have in the house of other people. And again, Pluto it's a 20-year long transit. So this is going to be like a long-term experience for Drake. Unfortunately, this is not something that's just going to immediately go away for him. We're also going to have Mars retrograde in Leo at the end of this year in his first house. So again, normally Mars moving through our first house makes us feel more active, more driven. We might be feeling ourselves, could be feeling more sexy, but for him, it's going to be retrograde. So it's not going to be moving in that direction forward that he normally feels. Instead, it's probably going to feel a bit more frustrating and conflicting and internally just a lot of strife. So I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to unfold for him as we end 2024 and enter 2025. And then those eclipses again in that 3rd and 9th house, like, is what you say what you believe? And I think that's a big part of the challenge that he's having right now, or, the feedback that he's getting from the community. I'm also seeing, let me see if there's anything else I want to say about that. No, I think I'm good with Leo and Aquarius. I'm also seeing something interesting in Drake's 11th house. So Drake's 11th house is going to be in Gemini, which again is one of those double-bodied signs, mutable signs. It is sitting opposite his Saturn in the 5th house of Sagittarius, which is for him is creativity, children. So Saturn in the 5th is big time father energy, right? And he's also got Juno and Uranus there. But so Drake has Chiron in his 11th house of friendships, groups, and community. And that really, to me, speaks to a wounding of not feeling like you belong, right? And feeling like you may have to code switch at times or play different sides in some ways. And it really reminded me of Kendrick's sun being in Gemini and how that is just highlighting that wound big time for Drake. It's, making him recognize all of the ways that maybe he doesn't fit in. Maybe I don't belong here, or maybe I've been caught kind of living within these two worlds. Super interesting. I also see Saturn transiting his natal 8th house right now of Pisces. And I'm thinking about the 8th house in terms of power, joint resources, large amounts of money, psychology, secrets, things like that. And Saturn again is like this taskmaster. Saturn is the father, it's discipline, it's restrictions, it's trying to bring in a sense of maturity and responsibility there. And Drake has his natal Jupiter in Pisces, and Jupiter exalts in the sign of Pisces, so it's super strong here. But in the 8th house, it's almost like blowing up vices, right? Like all of the maybe underworld, darker things, gambling, sex, things like that. All of that is just blown up with the excess of Jupiter and the lack of boundaries in Pisces. It's sort of blurring the lines there, right? And it's sitting opposite the 2nd house of Virgo, which is like morals and what one believes in and the value systems and feelings of self-worth. And Virgo is super opinionated, right? About, what people are doing and if it's good enough. And, it can be very critical in that way. So I feel like that Saturn influence may be disciplining for abuses of power or trying to bring structure to something that is breaching boundaries. I wrote drugs, addictions, illusions, business deals. All of that seems to be really lit up by that Saturn in Pisces, and we still have a lot of time there for that to still kind of play out for the fullness of whatever that story is going to be for Drake. And at some point, it's going to into Neptune at the end of Pisces there, and Neptune is amplifying those illusions of grandeur, those illusions of power, those murky boundaries, and Saturn is going to have a hard reckoning with that. And we did recently have Mars breeze through Neptune there and sort of break through that fog, and that's kind of aligning with all of these things being exposed for Drake. So this is very interesting timing for him, and unfortunately, again, it's not something that's just going to end right away. Like, we still have a good year of Saturn in Pisces, I believe. So yeah, very interesting. Taboo excess. And then there's this trine happening to all of that stuff down in that 4th house of Scorpio. So trines can be helpful, or trines can just make it really easy for these things to be exposed, or really easy for these things to come to light, right? Really easy to have these emotional connections or these taboo excesses. Yeah, I think that's all that I have in terms of Drake's chart. Oh, no. Last thing is his moon in Cancer in that 6th house. So not only do we have trines happening from Pisces, we also have this moon in Cancer in the 12th house giving trines. And this is an interesting placement. So to get into that Cancer moon in the 12th house, all of this water energy is why Drake is so good at the melodic, more R&B leaning stuff, because he's got a lot of deep feeling energy with that sort of dreamy influence from the water, right? And so his moon in the 12th house really aids to that. The moon is strong in Cancer, but in the 12th house, there's an element of shadow involved, self-sabotage. There's a part of this that is not sometimes easily accessed. It's behind us in a lot of ways. I think most clearly of Drake's lyrics, "I only love my bed and my mama, I'm sorry." Like, that is a perfect example of a moon in the 12th house, because rest and retreat is a big part of that energy, but it's also just connected to the feelings and to the mother and the nurturing of the native. So he's got a lot going on with the water signs, a lot of trines going down to that 4th house of Scorpio, and that moon in the 12th house is just really talking about his connection to his mother. Again, another ancestral link. The 12th house can sometimes be like this victim martyr, savior complex that goes on, right? So that's a little bit there too. Like, he probably feels a large responsibility to his mom. He probably understands her hurts and her pains, but it's also kind of subconsciously affecting him in ways that he may not even be aware of. And there could just be very distorted views of women that also kind of show up there. And I'm thinking also a bit now about his natal Saturn, which would represent his father, showing up in that 5th house of creativity and children and things like that. And his father really is sort of a part of his creative process. And he really talks about his dad. His dad also was a musician and kind of following in his footsteps and kind of enjoying his success with his father. But this Saturn squares Jupiter in that 8th house. So it's really like dad's excesses are now influencing Drake's excesses. And he's maybe not learning the lesson there, right? Because that square is to teach us. And if we're kind of falling into the same trappings, maybe we're not learning what we're supposed to be learning there. Yeah, I think that's it for Drake. Let's go ahead and get into the synastry. Drake's chart is the middle wheel. The external wheel is where Kendrick's placements fall in relation to Drake's chart. Kendrick, again, is that Gemini. His Chiron, and his Venus all show up in that 11th house space of community and friendships and aspirations on Drake's Chiron. So Kendrick is really lighting up, possibly the way Drake has felt like he has not fit in. Not feeling like he belongs. But Kendrick has Venus there. And again, Venus represents women. And in relation to that Chiron and the sun, Kendrick's exposure, it's almost making me feel like Kendrick is exposing the abuses of women within that community and within relation to Drake. So that is very interesting to me. And I also see that Kendrick has his Mars and Chiron in Cancer, right here in that 12th house, right on Drake's moon in the 12th. So there is he's aggressively and verbally exposing your secrets. Like, it does not get more literal than that, right? Like, if we think about the 12th house as being this, closet that Drake has been shoving all of his emotional demons into, and we think about Mars as being that aggressive placement, but then also Mercury being about the speech, in the 12th house is the exposing of those emotional secrets. And Kendrick's MC is also there. So again, it's the top of his chart in the most private spot of Drake's chart. And it's just, you know, it's very sensitive for Drake. That's unfortunate for him, but that's just kind of the way that energy plays out between them. So I bet I wouldn't be surprised if Kendrick has always kind of seen Drake more clearly maybe than other people have, and now it's just being activated that he say something. Let's now move into how Kendrick's chart is impacted by Drake. So Kendrick is going to be the inner wheel, Drake is going to be the outer wheel. The things that I noticed here is that Drake falls into Kendrick's second house of values and power, and to me that just feels like a clash of those values and power systems. I bet money is somewhere involved in this, right? And somewhere a part of this conflict. So that's kind of interesting too. We also see that Drake's Mars is in Kendrick's fifth house, sort of activating his creativity. Whatever it is that's going on between these dudes, Drake is certainly sparking a sense of creative passion in Kendrick, and that shows up in that fifth house energy with Drake's Mars there. We also see that Drake has Jupiter in Kendrick's sixth house, right on his moon again. And it's almost like that Jupiter is giving him more work. It's giving him blessings through work. So I do think that Drake may have given Kendrick work opportunities in the past, but that's still happening because again, that creative spark is making the work more available, more well received because of Drake's Jupiter in that house. I also see that Drake's North Node is in Kendrick's seventh house. So this is a part of their destined conflict between one another. Whatever this battle is advancing Kendrick in some way in his journey through relationships with others and conflict with others. Drake's moon is in Kendrick's 10th house, which kind of echoes what I was saying about Kendrick's chart or about Drake's chart in the Synastry before, that it's just a public call out. It's advancing Kendrick's career through Drake's emotional experience, and your hurt is publicized. Drake's ascendant also falls into Kendrick's 11th house of community, and I just wrote the pride before the fall. Right? Like we talked about that 29-degree ascendant before. We talked about Kendrick kind of being the voice of the collective. And it's just like, you know, Drake is sort of right in the middle of whatever that storyline is going to be, or I guess with the 29-degree, right at the ending of whatever that storyline is going to be, which again just brings up another level of that conflict between what's happening in the industry and Kendrick feeling responsible in some way to address it, to confront it. And then we also, I think that was it in terms of the Synastry. So yeah, there's a lot going on with these boys. That is for sure. I cannot believe that I had so much to say about it, but there's a lot going on with them. And now I kind of just want to get into a tarot pull. Okay, this is definitely my longest video to date. So if you're still hanging in there, thank you. I appreciate you being here. That was my breakdown of the charts. Now I'm going to go into a tarot pull. Let's see. I think I'd like to start with a 3-card pull. One for Drake, one for Kendrick, one for Drake, and one for the energy in between them. I think I'd like to start there. And then just kind of see where it goes from there. I kind of want to know the source. Like I want to know what this is all about and where this started. Like what is really at the heart of this beef. And so hopefully we can get some clarity around that and just see what the cards have to say. I want to know what the root of their conflict is. What happened? What is going on? What is each of their perspective as to what happened or the cause of all of this is. For Kendrick, the Chariot. For Drake, the Tower. Both major arcana. In between them, the High Priestess. Whew. So the Chariot is a card of movement. It's about action. It's about a journey. And it's also about victory, perseverance. So I think to some extent Kendrick felt like nothing's happening. I need to make something happen. Like things are going on. I need to make something happen. I need to prove that I'm right. I just need to take action. I just need to move. The Tower card is not looking good for Drake. Yeah, that's a tough one. The Tower card in this case is about like upheaval. It's about, you know, something kind of falling apart. It's about a disgrace to some extent. It's also a sudden downfall or a sudden change. So I think this may have been brewing for a long time. I think Kendrick's probably known that it's been brewing for a long time, and he finally was the one that was like, I'm going to do something about it. Oh, interesting. I'll talk about that too. So that's the Chariot kind of taking the movement. The Tower, again, just being like this disgrace, this fall from grace. Again, that 29-degree Regulus, right? Like, I think whatever Kendrick's been doing, he's probably been doing shady things, or whatever Drake's been doing, he's probably been doing shady things for a minute. And it's been known, and finally Kendrick was just like, I'm going to get this moving because I'm tired of it just not being addressed. And then we have the High Priestess in between them, which is about self-knowledge. It's about mystery and intuition, secrets and purity. So I do think that there is a level of, I think I mentioned in the breakdown of Kendrick's chart, is that he feels a responsibility to mature Drake. It almost seems like he's like, why is no one raising this boy? And he's kind of taking that on, and he sees the ways that things are not going well, or the ways that things are being manipulated, and is just, you know, very clear on the exposure of that, and just feels very called to do something about it. Again, trusting the intuition and really sort of listening to that, having a sense of self-knowledge, exposing the secrets, and being able to come from a place that's pure of heart, right? Like, you know, there have been accusations lodged against Kendrick, and they may or may not be true, but in Kendrick's work, he really goes out of his way to kind of address his shadow self, and to kind of expose his vulnerabilities, right? So that's kind of using the High Priestess in the strongest sense. And then I looked at the bottom of the card, and the Magician was there. And the Magician is about creativity, inspired action, power, self-confidence, right? Like, that's at the heart of this. And I feel like there's a confrontation of, you know, are you living your art? Are you, you know, acting from a sense of power and from a sense of completion or self-possession or self-knowledge? Yeah, that's really interesting. And look, all of its major arcana cards. So again, you know, the major arcana are larger themes, where the minor arcana are more like transitional moments. So this feels like something substantial that's been happening for a long time, that will be happening for a long time, and that needed to be addressed on a massive level. And Kendrick was the one who made the move. I think I'll pull 3 more just out of curiosity, though I feel very fulfilled with that pull. 6 of Pentacles for Kendrick, 7 of Cups for Drake, 4 of Wands in between them. Okay, so the 6 of Pentacles is about sort of like redistributing funds, or like, you know, giving from one to the other. Wow, that's really interesting. It's generosity. It's this like yin yang energy, giving, receiving help. So that's the sense of duty that I feel like Kendrick has, right? Like, he feels like this is his job. Look at what this guy is holding. It's a scale, Libra rising. He feels like he is the one who has to deliver this bit of justice. And again, representing, you know, those who may be in lesser positions, or who may be unable to speak for themselves, or to, you know, make as big of an impact as he can make, right? And then I see that 7 of Cups there for Drake. That's about too many choices, being unable to commit, you know, giving into the illusions of grandeur, you know, possibly having multiple emotional things going on, because the cups are affiliated with emotions, right? So he's just kind of all over the place and not really clear about what he's supposed to be doing or what he should be doing. I also see that 4 of Wands in between them, and that's very much like a family card. It's like a happy ending card, celebration, but I'm really seeing that as the family piece. And I think a lot of the conflict at the heart of this might be about the different ways that they raise their families. And again, Kendrick just feeling a moral obligation to sort of challenge that and to break through that illusion, and again to offer to sort of raise Drake up in a way, right? Like, grow up, step to the plate, stop living in this dream world. Like, look at what's going on in the real world, the pentacles, the earth, you know, what is actually happening. Let's pull 3 more, and then I think I'll wrap it up. 5 of Swords for Kendrick. 2 of Wands for Drake. Ooh, oof, oof. This was at the bottom of the deck. Oof. Okay. 5 of Swords for Kendrick. Mental annihilation, conflict, bullying, violence. I think there may be some pushback onto Kendrick. Maybe. Just, you know, if I have to kind of look at this objectively, there might be some people that feel like, why'd you go after this man? Why did you bully this man? But again, Kendrick feels like the lone person who could do this, who needed to do it. So even if he ruffled a few feathers, even if there are people that don't like what he did, I think he knows, intellect, swords, that he needed to do what he needed to do. And maybe finally the bully is getting bullied in some way. At the hand of an underdog, right? Like, Drake definitely has more pop acclaim in some ways. He has the squeakier clean image to some degree, and Kendrick has been, you know, made fun of for being small and, you know, maybe for using too big of words or whatever. But, you know, ultimately it may have won the battle of the words, the rap battle. Drake here is represented as the 2 of Wands, which is about waiting for results, making a choice, future planning. It's also like looking ahead. I think Drake may be taking a trip. I think he needs to get away to some extent, and just to kind of reflect and to do some soul searching and to just kind of see how this all falls out. If he's smart, that's what he'll do. He will just go away for a little bit and kind of get this together. The 10 of Swords in between them, rock bottom, collapse, breakdown. It's also like attention-seeking behavior. It's very dramatic in some ways. I think this is done. I think Drake knows he's done. I don't really know that we will get another response from Drake. I think he said what he's going to say. I think we know who won the battle to some degree. So the 10 of Swords definitely represents the ending of that. But I thought it was interesting that the Devil card was at the bottom of the deck. The Devil card is about sabotage, bondage, materialism, restrictions, our vices, things like that. This sparked some revelations that I think Drake will have to answer for. I think it exposed a lot of his demons. And I think while yes, there is an element of like destroying the pride and destroying the materialism and like the greed and all of that sort of excessive negative behavior, I also just think like Drake kind of knows maybe that he might not be the best person, or, you know, that he might have made some choices that were not so great. And he's going to kind of have to own up to that. Wow. Interesting readings. If you stayed for all of this, you are a real one, and I appreciate you. And it's, you know, we'll see where this goes. I think, you know, Kendrick may respond again with that 5 of Swords, but I think if he does, people might just look at him as like a bully. Like, why are you beating a dead horse? So he might just want to let this go. Maybe give us one more to wrap it up. But I would just kind of caution that with the 5 of Swords. You know, you might start to look like the bad guy if you keep pushing this, because I think we all get it at this point. So that's it, y'all. Thanks for hanging in there. We'll see how this falls. Bye.